Consider the city of Istanbul. Look at its location on a map. Initially, the city appears to be situated by the sea. Looking closer reveals something unusual. This city spans two continents. One part is in Europe and the other is in Asia. A single city has a foothold on two continents. Such cities are rare in the world. That is not the only special feature of Istanbul. In the center of the city stands the Hagia Sophia. This building was constructed in the 6th century. Originally, the building served as a Christian cathedral. The Byzantine Empire used it as the heart of the Eastern Orthodox Church. In 1453, the Ottoman Empire conquered Constantinople. At that time, the building became an Islamic mosque. The building served as a mosque for hundreds of years. In 1935, the building became a museum. This change was the decision of Atatürk, the founder of the Republic of Turkey. Atatürk declared that the building belonged to no single religion. He transformed it into a neutral space. In 2020, the location became a mosque once again. The site changed from a cathedral to a mosque. Then it changed from a museum back to a mosque. The history of this single building explains the entire nation of Turkey. This is the main subject of our story today. Why does Turkey operate in its current manner? The country seems like a Middle Eastern nation, but does not follow Middle Eastern ways. Turkey wants to join Europe, yet often has conflicts with European nations. The country appears to be an Islamic nation, but maintains a secular republic. Turkey insists on its own way during every decisive moment. Why has Turkey continued this balancing act for hundreds of years? This is not just a matter of cultural differences or religion. It is a question of how a new country was built after an empire collapsed. Today, we will examine the entire picture from start to finish. We will not simply follow a chronological timeline of history. Instead, we will analyze why this country must always consider two worlds simultaneously. We will connect the past and the present with a single question. The first key to understanding Turkey is the map. We must look beyond just identifying the location of the country. It is important to see the role this land has played on Earth. Turkey is located on the Anatolia Peninsula. The land touches the Aegean Sea to the west and the Black Sea to the north. To the south, the land reaches the Mediterranean Sea. This land connects directly to the Balkan Peninsula. To the north, the Caucasus Mountains lead toward Russia. To the south, the borders of Syria and Iraq begin. Europe, the Middle East, and Russia all gather around this single piece of land. The core of this geography consists of two narrow waterways. These are the Bosphorus Strait in the north and the Dardanelles Strait in the south. These two straits are the only passages connecting the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. Nations on the Black Sea coast must pass through these waters to reach the Mediterranean. This includes Russia, Ukraine, and Romania. The same is true for Mediterranean powers entering the Black Sea. Control over these straits has been a key variable in world history. It has influenced Europe, the Middle East, and Russia for centuries. Today, Turkey exercises military control over these straits. This power comes from the Montreux Convention, signed in 1936. According to this treaty, Turkey can limit the passage of warships during wartime. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, Turkey applied this rule. Turkey blocked additional Russian warships from entering the Black Sea. As a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, Turkey indirectly supported Ukraine. However, Turkey did not completely cut ties with Russia. The straits allow Turkey to take such complex actions. The comparison of Turkey to a gatekeeper nation is fitting. Turkey is not just a country stuck between continents. It is the country that holds the key to the door. A person standing at a door must always watch both sides. However, that person also has the power to close the door. This dynamic has shaped the entire history of Turkey. These geopolitical conditions are not limited to modern times. For thousands of years, different powers fought to control this land. Many civilizations overlapped in Anatolia. The Hittites, Persians, Greeks, and Romans all passed through this region. The Byzantine Empire ruled from Constantinople for over 1,000 years. This city was the eastern end of the Christian world. It was also the western boundary meeting the Islamic world. In the 11th century, a new force began to enter. These were the Turkic nomadic groups. They moved west from Central Asia and entered Anatolia. They established the Seljuk dynasty and clashed with the Byzantine Empire. The Crusades were also fought in this region during this period. European Christian forces and Islamic forces became complexly entangled. The Seljuk dynasty eventually weakened due to internal division and Mongol invasions. Consequently, Anatolia split into small Turkic principalities. One of these began to grow in power at the end of the 13th century. This group started in a small border area of northwestern Anatolia. The group was later called the Ottoman Empire, named after its leader. In the beginning, the group was very small. It was just a frontier force bordering the Byzantine Empire. However, over hundreds of years, it grew into an empire ruling 3 continents. The Ottoman Empire expanded its territory in a unique way. The leaders did not rely solely on military force. They had specific methods for managing people in conquered regions. Non-Muslim communities were allowed to keep their own legal systems and religions. This was known as the millet system. It was different from forcing a single religion on everyone. While not perfect, the system embraced various ethnicities and religions. The Ottoman expansion into Europe began in the 14th century. While the Byzantine Empire struggled with internal conflict, the Ottomans crossed into the Balkans. They captured Bulgaria, Serbia, and Greece, one by one. Finally, in 1453, Mehmed II conquered Constantinople. This event was more than just the conquest of a single city. Constantinople had been the capital of the Eastern Christian world for a millennium. A symbolic place, carrying the traditions of the Roman Empire, had fallen. All of Europe felt a great shock. The Ottoman Empire renamed the city Istanbul and made it the new capital. Mehmed II considered himself the successor to the Roman emperors. He studied Roman history with Byzantine scholars. From the start, the Ottoman Empire was different from pure Islamic forces. The empire grew by absorbing the legacy of the Byzantine Empire. Afterward, Ottoman territory continued to expand. It faced Persia to the east and seized Egypt to the south. The holy cities of Mecca and Medina came under Ottoman control. The Sultan of the empire also took the role of caliph. The caliph was the supreme leader of the Islamic world. The empire advanced west to Hungary and threatened Europe. In 1529, the Ottomans even besieged Vienna in Austria. This siege was an existential threat to European powers. During its peak, the Ottoman Empire governed a vast territory. It ruled much of the Mediterranean like an inland lake. An important point must be noted here. Turkey was not just an ordinary country in the Middle East. It was the heart of the empire that ruled the region for a long time. It was the center of the Arab world. The Ottoman Empire ruled the Arab world for about 4 centuries. This history explains why modern Turkey claims influence in the Middle East. A sense of having ruled that world in the past remains. It is also important that the Ottoman Empire spanned across Europe. Much of the Balkan Peninsula was under Ottoman rule for hundreds of years. The same applies when Turkey discusses Europe today. There is a sense that parts of Europe were once their territory. This historical weight makes the relationship between Turkey and Europe complicated. However, cracks eventually began to appear in the Great Empire. The expansion of the empire slowed after the late 17th century. The Ottomans attacked Vienna again in 1683, but failed. Afterward, the empire was gradually pushed out of European territories. External pressure was not the only problem. Structural issues were also building up inside the empire. Central control weakened, and local leaders began to act independently. The elite military unit, known as the Janissaries, became a political force. Even the Sultan could not easily control this group. Meanwhile, Europe was changing rapidly. During the 17th and 18th centuries, a scientific revolution occurred in Europe. The Industrial Revolution exploded European productivity. Military technology and administrative abilities also developed significantly. While the Ottoman Empire stood still, Europe leaped forward. The expansion of Russia was another major threat. Throughout the 18th century, Russia tried to move south toward the Black Sea. The two empires fought several wars. The Ottoman Empire lost territory, and its financial burden grew. In the 19th century, the issue of nationalism became serious. Many Balkan countries declared independence or demanded autonomy. European powers intervened in this process. The Ottoman Empire continued to lose territory. European powers at the time called the empire the sick man of Europe. The once powerful empire had become like a patient who might collapse. Great powers already calculated how to divide the land after the fall. Ottoman leaders recognized this crisis and began reforms. The Tanzimat reforms started in 1839. This was a major turning point for the nation. Tanzimat means reorganization in the Turkish language. It was a project to transform the entire country into a Western style. They changed the legal system to match European models. The leaders also modernized the military and established modern educational institutions. However, these reforms created a strange contradiction. The effort to save the empire led to a crisis of identity. Confusion arose as Islamic law and secular law existed together. When rights for non-Muslims were recognized, the Muslim majority felt dissatisfied. Young elites who learned Western ideas questioned the traditional order. Internal conflicts deepened instead of saving the empire. In the late 19th century, a new group of intellectuals appeared, known as the Young Ottomans. They demanded constitutional government. They wanted to limit the absolute power of the Sultan. A constitution was briefly created in 1876. However, Sultan Abdul Hamid II quickly suspended the constitution. He maintained a strong central government due to external threats. In 1908, an even more radical group appeared. These were the Young Turks. They led a revolution centered on military officers and intellectuals. Eventually, the Sultan surrendered, and the constitution was restored. The Young Turks did not just demand a constitution. They emphasized a new element called Turkish nationalism. The concept of a specific nation entered the multi-ethnic Ottoman Empire. This brought tension with other ethnic groups in the empire. In 1912 and 1913, the Balkan Wars broke out. New nations in the Balkans united to fight the Ottoman Empire. The empire suffered a terrible defeat. It lost most of the Balkan territories it had ruled for centuries. This was a massive shock to the people. It confirmed that the empire was truly collapsing. To overcome the crisis, the leadership gambled by joining Germany. They entered the First World War on the side of Germany. The result was a disaster. After the war, the Ottoman Empire became a defeated nation. The Treaty of Sevres in 1920 aimed to dismantle the empire. Most regions except Istanbul were to be divided among the great powers. The entire country was at risk of disappearing. At this critical moment, Mustafa Kemal appeared. He was an officer known for the victory at the Battle of Gallipoli. Kemal went to Anatolia in 1919 and organized a resistance movement. He established a temporary parliament in Ankara. Kemal aimed to build a new nation-state instead of the fallen empire. The situation was very difficult. The Greek army pushed into western Anatolia. Kemal also had to face armies in the east and south. Furthermore, the government in Istanbul labeled his movement as treason. Although enemies were everywhere, Kemal turned the tide of the war. In 1922, he finally defeated the Greek army and reclaimed the territory. The Treaty of Lausanne in 1923 confirmed the current borders. That same year, the Republic of Turkey was officially proclaimed. Kemal became the first president of the republic. He was not satisfied with just gaining independence. He wanted to change the identity of the nation completely. Kemal did not want to inherit the empire. Instead, he wanted to end the past and start anew. His first major action was to abolish the caliphate in 1924. The caliph was the successor of Muhammad and the leader of the Muslim community. This role, held by Ottoman sultans for a long time, was removed. This shocked the global Islamic community. A core Islamic institution from the 7th century disappeared overnight. However, the reforms did not stop there. Kemal abolished Islamic religious courts and introduced Western legal codes. He changed the official calendar to the Western version. The state took control of religious education and restricted clothing in public. In 1928, Islam was removed as the state religion. Turkey moved toward becoming a strictly secular state. This transition forms the foundation of modern Turkey. It is also the source of an ongoing struggle. Turkey also reformed its writing system. It replaced Arabic script with a new Turkish alphabet based on Latin letters. This meant that within one generation, people could not read old Ottoman documents. This was a profound change in language and literacy. Kemal also introduced a law for surnames. During the Ottoman era, Turkic people did not have family names. Kemal required every citizen to choose a surname. He received the name Atatürk, which means father of the Turks. All these changes happened within just 10 years. Kemal believed that merely organizing the empire was not enough. He felt that the Ottoman way of thinking caused the empire to fail. The Islamic-centered political structure was also seen as a problem. He used the modern European nation-state as a model. He believed the country could not survive without a complete reconstruction. This is how Turkey became different from the Middle East. Turkey did not return to Islam like the Iranian Revolution. Turkey is also not like Egypt, which wavers between Islamic and secular laws. Turkey built a secular republic where an Islamic empire once stood. The nation abolished the caliphate by its own hand. This historical fact is very important for understanding the relationship between Turkey and the Middle East. We must note that secularization did not mean people abandoned Islam. The vast majority of the population was Muslim and remains so today. Religious beliefs and lifestyles continued. Kemal separated the state from religion rather than destroying religion itself. However, this separation was forced from the top down. This project became a seed for future conflict. These seeds would grow decades later. We will discuss that shortly. In 1923, the world was preparing for another great change. The shadow of the Second World War began to fall. Turkey made very clever choices during that war. The country maintained neutrality and avoided joining the conflict. Turkey continued to trade with Germany. At the same time, Turkey maintained relations with the Allied powers. By February of 1945, the war favored the Allies. Turkey finally declared war on Germany at that time. This was a diplomatic gesture to show support for the Allied side. After the war ended, a new problem arrived from the Soviet Union. Joseph Stalin wanted stronger access to the Black Sea. The Soviet Union demanded joint control of the straits. They also claimed parts of the eastern border region. For Turkey, this was like a demand to become a Soviet satellite state. Turkey naturally refused. However, the country was afraid to face the Soviet Union alone. This fear was the decisive factor that pulled Turkey toward the West. The United States saw this situation as an opportunity. During the early Cold War, the United States needed to contain the Soviet Union. Geographically important Turkey had to be on the western side. The United States could not ignore a country on the southern flank of the Soviets. In 1947, the United States announced the Truman Doctrine. They began providing military and economic aid to Turkey and Greece. In 1952, Turkey joined the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This was a monumental decision. Turkey completely entered the collective security system of the West. Turkey became an important defensive line against the communist bloc. Turkey also participated in the Korean War. Turkish soldiers fought bravely as part of the United Nations forces. This participation helped accelerate the entry of Turkey into the Western Alliance. To South Korea, Turkey was a country that came from very far away. On the surface, Turkey was a firm member of the Western camp. However, domestic politics were not stable at all. The Republic of Kemal started as a one-party system. His Republican People's Party was the only party. In 1946, a multi-party system was introduced. In 1950, the opposition Democratic Party won the election. This was the first peaceful transfer of power in the nation. It was the beginning of a democratic experiment. Prime Minister Adnan Menderes attempted several changes while in power. He released some of the religious restrictions set by the previous government. He restored the Arabic call to prayer and allowed religious schools. These policies gained public support, but alarmed the military and bureaucrats. In 1960, the Turkish military carried out a coup. Prime Minister Menderes was arrested and executed by hanging the following year. A democratically elected leader was killed by the military. The military claimed they intervened to protect the secular republic. Their mission was to guard the secular principles created by Kemal. A similar pattern repeated over the following decades. In 1971, the military pressured the government again. In 1980, another direct coup occurred. The 1980 coup was particularly intense. At that time, Turkey suffered from extreme violence between left-wing and right-wing groups. Hundreds of people were losing their lives. The military used this as a reason to take full power. They suspended the constitution and dissolved all political parties. This history shows how Turkish secularism differs from European models. France also has a strong secular tradition. However, that was a result of long-term consensus in civil society. Turkish secularism was a project pushed from the top down. The military used physical force to protect those principles. Secularism was not a value internalized by the entire society. There was constant tension between official principles and reality. This suppressed energy eventually appeared in a new form. At the start of the 21st century, Erdogan and his party emerged. In the 2002 election, the Justice and Development Party won a landslide victory. In 2003, Recep Tayyip Erdogan became the prime minister. This was more than just an Islamic party taking power. People who were excluded from the center of society finally rose up. They entered the center of politics with confidence. These were conservative citizens who did not fit the culture of the old elites. These voters were devout Muslims from rural areas and small towns. They also included a new middle class that grew during economic development. These groups found their voice through the Justice and Development Party. Erdogan himself came from a poor neighborhood in Istanbul. His background was far from the established elite culture. This background became his political asset. His message that he was just like the common people reached the public. Early in his leadership, the Erdogan government actively sought membership in the European Union. This surprised many people at the time. An Islamic-friendly party was pushing for European integration. However, there was a clear reason for this. Conditions for joining the European Union included strengthening democracy and human rights. It also required transferring power from the military to civilians. Following these standards weakened the political influence of the military. For Erdogan, the European Union was a tool to restrain the generals. Turkey carried out many democratic reforms in the early 2000s. Official membership negotiations began in 2005. However, the process was not smooth. Strong voices within the European Union opposed the entry of Turkey. Major countries like France and Germany were hesitant. They were uncomfortable with a Muslim nation of over 70 million people joining. The issue of Cyprus also became a major obstacle. As negotiations continued, more problems began to pile up. Changes also occurred inside Turkey. As the government became stable, the Erdogan regime began to centralize power. Control over the media was strengthened. Opposition politicians were arrested, and the independence of the judiciary weakened. These actions moved away from European human rights standards. The harsh crackdown during the Gezi Park protests in 2013 drew criticism. In 2016, a coup attempt occurred. The Erdogan government used this as an opportunity for a massive purge. There were large-scale dismissals in the military, judiciary, and education sectors. In 2017, a referendum greatly increased the power of the president. The office of the prime minister was abolished. The president gained strong influence over the executive and judicial branches. Critics called this a move toward authoritarianism. Membership negotiations with the European Union effectively stopped in 2018. The European Parliament recommended freezing the talks. Turkey remains an official candidate, but there are no signs of restarting. Despite this, Turkey is not simply following an anti-Western path. Turkey is still a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It has the largest conventional military in the alliance after the United States. Alliance bases are located on Turkish territory. Turkey also fulfills its collective defense obligations. Simultaneously, Turkey purchased a Russian missile defense system. The decision to buy the S-400 system made Western allies very uncomfortable. Mixing Western and Russian weapon systems is a security concern. The United States imposed sanctions in response to this purchase. This summarizes the complex balancing act that defines the nation today. Turkey did not give up on the S-400 missile system. This was not just a simple weapon purchase. It was a declaration of autonomy from Western decisions. Turkey showed that it would not simply follow Western orders. Their actions in the Syrian civil war were also very complex. The primary concern for Turkey was the Kurdish forces in Syria. They viewed these groups as a threat to their own national unity. When the United States used Kurdish forces, Turkey attacked them. Even as allies in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, they supported different sides. Meanwhile, Turkey continued talks with Russia about gas imports and economy. They promoted the Turk Stream natural gas pipeline project together. Turkey does not break away from the West completely. However, they do not fully join the Russian or Middle Eastern blocs either. Turkey chooses the most advantageous side for every specific issue. This strategy can be called strategic autonomy. This was clear during the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Turkey officially criticized the invasion of the sovereign territory. Turkey voted for the United Nations resolution condemning Russia. They also supported Ukraine with military drone technology. At the same time, Turkey did not join Western sanctions. They maintained steady economic exchanges with Russia throughout the conflict. President Erdogan acted as a mediator and spoke with both sides. In 2022, he mediated the Ukrainian grain export agreement. Few countries speak with both sides during a modern war. Turkey is not a complete enemy to either side. Turkey is also strengthening relations with nations in the Gulf. They supported Azerbaijan and expanded their influence across Africa. Military cooperation continues in places like Libya and Syria. Turkey is increasing its presence in multiple directions at once. Turkey values trade more than belonging to a specific camp. Transactional relationships define the Turkish approach most accurately. This strategy comes from very old geographic conditions. It is due to controlling the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits. Geography made Turkey a gatekeeper from the very beginning. It gave the nation a destiny of dealing with both sides. The Byzantine Empire survived on this land for the same reason. The Ottoman Empire built power across 3 continents from here. The memory of that empire remains in the identity of the people. There is a strong sense that they were never peripheral. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk created a new nation from the ruins. He established a secular state and left the Islamic identity behind. This reset distinguishes Turkey from other countries in the Middle East. Turkey is the only country to abolish the caliphate system. However, that change did not completely transform the entire society. Tension between secular elites and the religious majority continued. Turkey remains within the Western alliance, but refuses to be subordinate. The era of President Erdogan operates on this historical foundation. Turkey needs recognition from the West and influence in the Middle East. The nation refuses to let others make its own calculations. Calling Turkey simply a Middle Eastern country is often incorrect. Turkey is the successor state to an empire that ruled the region. It is not just another country within the regional order. Yet, it still lacks certain qualities to be called European. Turkey wanted to join Europe but felt uncomfortable meeting their standards. The roots of this discomfort lie deep in history. A country that once ruled parts of Europe now faces evaluation. This reverse situation creates very complex emotions for the nation. Let us return to the story of the Hagia Sophia. This building changed from a museum back to a mosque. This occurred in the year 2020. Europe and the United States criticized this move strongly. They claimed Turkey was retreating from secular republican principles. Supporters of the government called it a restoration of identity. Both interpretations are correct in their own way. This represents the inherent complexity of modern Turkey. The nation holds both a secular and an Islamic consciousness. The two values coexist and sometimes conflict within the same building. Ataturk, making it a museum in 1935, was political. Erdogan, changing it back in 2020, was also political. The building stands while absorbing all these different declarations. Turkey is much the same way as that famous building. Memories of the empire and the Cold War are layered together. Modern balancing diplomacy is the latest layer of this history. Explaining Turkey using only one factor will always be incorrect. A secular republic with imperial memories has dealt with two worlds. Turkey increased its autonomy through this long and difficult process. This is the most accurate way to describe the nation. Turkey does not simply sway between Europe and Islam. The nation includes both worlds within its own historical calculations. This story shows how much international politics is tied to history. Turkish choices in the news today connect to ancient decisions. The reset by Ataturk was meaningful because of the caliphate. Modern movements attempting to reverse that reset cause significant debate. This debate links to European Union negotiations and alliance conflicts. Current politics never exists, apart from the lessons of the past. Turkey demonstrates this fact very clearly to the world. The video for today will conclude here. Thank you for following this long and complex story. Please leave a comment if you have questions or topics. I will see you again next time.